on, I already marked this as not for kids. Crap boobs crap. There, you happy? Jeez.
Cold open for this one featured a little girl playing with her doll, and could someone please call an exorcist?
Fun fact, the original Annabelle doll was actually a Raggedy Ann doll. Not saying anything, just, you know.
On a serious note, I do like how the doll's colors remain normal while everything else is in sepia tone to emphasize its importance to this story. Could have gone without the creepy, realistic stitching that's been statically layered onto it, but whatever, it's only gonna haunt my nightmares for a couple of weeks. The episode proper opened with Hazuki sewing something that was gonna at least be better than this dollar store version of Belle's dress. Actually, was this based off of the live action movie? Later at the Mahodo, while they were snacking on a never-ending plate of cookies, Hazuki kept on working on her earlier project, which was a bid for Hana to get ready for the next episode's exam. Ironically though, she wasn't all that into frilly attire like this, likely due to overexposure to it from her mother. And speaking of which, she also got her a fancy kimono so that she could take some traditional Japanese dance lessons, which yeah, just looking at this stuff makes me tired. More so for Hazuki, as she had never been told about these lessons, and in fact, they were gonna start the next day. Thus, kind of rightfully, she tried to say no, but...
Yeah, let's just file this scene away for later.
And not too surprisingly, while she was competent enough at it, she also had no passion for dancing, which why would she be? She had no plans of taking it up in the first place.
Hey, Hazuki, it's never too late. You can always travel back in time and just fix a few things.
She even ended up admiring Hana's assertiveness when she rejected pop singing, though honestly I think that would just be the most natural response to anyone singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Seriously, am I the only one who finds that nursery rhyme at least a little annoying? Well, regardless, the Ojamajo decide to help their friend with her little conundrum, so they track down the dance instructor.
Yosh, ikuyo!
I've got the chloroform ready.
Honestly, I think that would have been preferable than what the Ojamajo put this poor lady through, as they tried to delay her arrival to the Fujiwaras with every trick possible.
Ompu, I don't think that was your magic. Those things never work properly.
And for their final trick, I think they took something out of Bowser's playbook. As a result, the poor lady was in no condition to teach any lessons, so they called it a day, and our heroines kind of rightfully felt like pond scum. And yet, I can't really blame the Ojamajo for what they did, at least in comparison to this lady, who continued to literally and figuratively pile everything onto her daughter. As a result, Hazuki gave frankly the most appropriate response in this situation, resulting in...
Ding ding ding! What do we have for her, Johnny?
Okay, so obviously, I know what the lesson of this episode is going to be, but let's just put that aside for a minute. Instead, can we just talk about how much of a Karen this lady is?
Okay, so obviously I know how all this is going to end, but still, that doesn't excuse how overly dramatic Mrs. Fujiwara is being here and in the previous scene. Hazuki wasn't even being all that obstinate or anything, but rather than maybe rationally talking it out with her daughter to prevent placing any more needless stress on her, she decided to go into full soap opera mode with even the BGM backing her up. Thus, Hazuki had almost no choice but to feel guilt towards making her mother sad, even though again, a lot of this was Mrs. Fujiwara's fault for springing the dance lessons on her daughter out of nowhere. All I'm saying is, it's hard to feel bad for this lady when I can barely tell who's the parented child in this relationship.
Now, all that said, I'm not going to say this was a bad episode, as at the very least, that message was really damn good.
After that dramatic gaslit meltdown, Hazuki's real mom, Baya, went into Mrs. Fujiwara's backstory. As it turned out, her mother, in other words Hazuki's grandmother, was incredibly frugal, even though they were already kinda stupid rich by this point. Because of it, she never got around to buying her daughter a popular talking doll, though honestly I think that was for the best.
Yeah, I take back everything I said about Annabelle. That thing is way creepier.
Still, massive foreheads and dead eyes aside, like any generation, when you don't have the current fad, chances are good you're gonna be ostracized. and yet she bared with her ragdoll named Lily, even though again, Granny was just being a cheapskate. Fortunately, everyone's real mother, Baya, taught her some ventriloquism, which I doubt would have won these kids over so easily. I'm pretty sure they likely would have made fun of how much of a cheapskate her mom was, but whatever, it's not important to this story. And even though I'm still not excusing Grandma Fujiwara for not buying her kid just one doll, I do have to give points for her being resourceful enough to make dresses for Lily out of scraps. It taught her daughter the value of the yen, which would allow her to maintain her family's fortune, which is also great value to pass on to your kids. However, she clearly had no intentions of passing down such values on to her daughter, and did want to give her a little bit more of a pampered lifestyle, which honestly I'm normally not against, as I do think it's a good idea to give your kids what you couldn't have sometimes.
That said, let me just ask this. When has Mrs. Fujiwara ever asked what Hazuki wanted?
She bought her a ton of expensive dresses that Hazuki never asked for, signed her up for dance lessons with a day's notice, and in general was making her partake in things that only she thought would make her cuter.
Why, if I didn't know any better, I'd almost assume that she's trying to live vicariously through her daughter, and is even kind of treating her like her old doll. But really, what sort of mother would ever do that?
Yeah, I get what they're trying to do with this episode, but for reasons I'll explain in the closing thoughts, I can't fully get behind it, especially when they're leaning a lot in favor of Mrs. Fujiwara, even though again, a lot of this episode's conflict was her fault, granted likely unintentionally. Thus, even though we did end on a sweet though kinda schmaltzy note with Hazuki using her magic to restore the Lily doll, and used it to puppet her decision to keep wearing the clothes her mother made her wear, and keep taking the dance lessons that she wasn't totally into...
あなたにいろいろしつけすぎちゃったのかしら。そんなことない。
Bullshit.
Now, speaking from experience, my parents offered me the opportunity to take kendo lessons as a kid.
I kind of half-heartedly just said sure, and like Hazuki, it was a bit rough initially. However, because I agreed to it on my terms, I kept at it and eventually found that I liked it. Now, that might happen with Hazuki and her dance lessons eventually, but morally, a child should never just be strong-armed into this stuff. It's a bad value to teach, though I'm not even sure if this episode was trying to teach anything, as we ended on Hazuki finishing her bid for Hana, which she didn't like. So yeah, is being a helicopter parent a bad or good thing?
I don't know!
Oh boy, this episode was just kind of all over the place. On the one hand, the backstory Baya told was really good and made for a great story and lesson on its own. However, when bringing it back to the modern day and Mrs. Fujiwara's Karen antics, it really mellows things up. I would say I still did like it overall for the message and some of the humor, but still, I think we can easily say the best mom remains Mrs. Harakaze.
In general, I think a lot of my issues with this episode, and Hazuki's mother in general, can both be summed up as forced. A lot of the drama just doesn't feel properly built up, with Mrs. Fujiwara just getting really overly dramatic at the flip of a hat, when really it should be done gradually, like maybe slowly building towards her realizing Hazuki's discomfort. Otherwise, it not only makes things needlessly melodramatic, but also makes it feel like she's gaslighting her daughter, which, while maybe not entirely intentional, she ends up kinda doing by guilt-tripping her into doing everything because she's already spent a lot of money on her. Like, I learned how expensive my Kendo gear cost later, but that was well after I got into the sport. Meanwhile, Hazuki from the offset is being put into the hot seat with all of the decisions her mom is making for her. Now, maybe there is some sort of cultural difference in values here that allow her to get away with all of this, especially considering when this came out and people weren't quite as aware of helicopter parents back then. But even then, this still feels like such a broken Aesop, especially when they end on Hana clearly not liking her new outfit, and yet like mother like daughter, I guess. Now, that's not to say the messages themselves are bad. In fact, I do highly believe in concepts like respecting your parents and trying to understand their circumstances. And if at all possible, you should try to give a better life to your eventual kids. Those are all great messages, just very sloppily told here. Also, even with the guilt tripping afterwards, I did actually find the antics of the Ojamajo messing with the dance instructor to be genuinely funny. If the core conflict with the Fujiwaras were just a little more focused, I actually might have found this to be one of the better episodes of the season. As is though, it's just kind of okay for me, mostly thanks to that message, and at least now, I can officially say that one of these anime moms is the truest of Karens, so that's something.
And you know, it's just kind of funny how this review ends up lining up perfectly with this week's Delicious Party review. It's actually interesting to compare and contrast the mothers of these different anime and their relationships with their daughters. Kind of needless to say, but not only is Kokone's relationship with her is much healthier, but her resolution is much more satisfying. Go watch that review if you want to see what I mean. And until then though, farewell for now my friends, and hey, I see you trying to escape from your case. Let me at least clean up the floor before anything else.